My name is Clara Rivers. I'm 33 years old, and there's something about baptisms that always brings out the fakest version of my family. You would think a quiet church ceremony, soft hymns, echoing off stained glass, and a baby dressed in white would be enough to make people behave at least for a couple of hours. You would think a baptism would be about grace, forgiveness, and fresh starts. But in my family, events like these don't bring peace. They bring performances. Everyone rushes to look holy on the surface while sharpening their knives just out of sight, and I knew that going into my nephew's baptism last Sunday. What I didn't expect was how quickly they would remind me exactly where I stood. The church smelled like lilies and old wood polish, the kind of place where whispers carry farther than they should. I took a seat near the back, not because anyone asked me to, but because that's where I've always learned to exist comfortably. Visible enough to not be accused of absence, invisible enough to avoid confrontation. I wore a plain navy dress, nothing expensive looking, nothing that would invite questions. I've learned that in my family, the moment they sense success, the air shifts. Compliments turn into expectations. Curiosity becomes entitlement. So I keep things neutral, not struggling, not thriving, just there. Halfway through the ceremony, while the pastor spoke about family and unity, my aunt slid into the empty seat beside me. She didn't look at me at first. Her posture was perfect hands, folded, chin lifted like a woman who believed her presence alone was a blessing. Then she leaned just enough for her words to reach me and no one else. "It's sweet you showed up," she whispered warmly, even though nobody wanted you here. Her voice was soft, almost affectionate, which somehow made it worse. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. I turned my head slowly and smiled back at her because in that exact moment I remembered the 3 envelopes sitting in my car, stamped, sealed, addressed to her, my uncle, and my cousin. Formal notices informing them that their leases would not be renewed. Fully legal, fully final. They didn't know it yet. They still saw me as the quiet girl who accepted hand-me-downs and said thank you for scraps. They had no idea that I owned the homes they slept in. On paper, my life looks unremarkable. I run a property management business. Nothing flashy, no luxury cars, no designer labels. I started in real estate when I was 23 and built slowly, carefully, learning how to be patient when impatience would have been easier. I don't talk about my net worth. I don't correct assumptions. And in my family, that silence has been my shield. Because once they get a whiff of money, it turns into fake warmth and manipulative kindness faster than you can say family helps family. I didn't grow up with money. I was raised by my single mother, Janine, who worked double shifts to support me and my younger brother, Noah. We lived in a cramped apartment, while my mother's siblings lived across town in larger houses with manicured lawns and annual holiday newsletters bragging about promotions and private schools. They never offered help when we struggled, but they loved inviting us to family events just enough to feel charitable. I still remember one Christmas when I was 11, when my cousin Olivia gave me a sweater she had outgrown, still wrapped like it was new. My aunt beamed, like her daughter had solved world hunger. "She insisted you have it," she said, as if I should be honored. I said thank you because that's how I was raised. Fast forward 2 decades and not much has changed. Or so they think. They still see the girl who accepted secondhand kindness without complaint. Not the woman who owns the mortgage on Olivia's apartment building. Not the woman who quietly bought the house my uncle rents after it went into foreclosure. And definitely not the woman who now holds 3 properties occupied by 3 very specific relatives. The baptism was for Noah's son, which is the only reason I came. Noah has always been my safe place. When our family dynamics turned ugly, he was the one who never questioned my worth. Standing at the front of the church holding his child, he looked peaceful in a way I envied. I nodded at him when our eyes met, and he smiled back, that same quiet understanding we've always shared. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. I heard every third word at best. My mind kept circling back to the balance shifting beneath all of us, to the letters already sent, to the fact that while they were busy pretending I didn't matter, I had been building something they could never take from me. And as I sat there smiling politely, hands folded in my lap, I realized something else too. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I was ready. Lunch after the baptism was held in the community hall behind the church, one of those multi-purpose spaces that smelled faintly of coffee disinfectant and overcooked vegetables, no matter the occasion. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it the shift. Conversations dipped, just slightly. Eyes flicked toward me and then away again, as if acknowledging my presence for too long might invite discomfort. Maybe it was all in my head, but I've learned to trust that instinct. When you grow up learning how to read rooms to survive them, you don't mistake silence for coincidence. Noah spotted me almost immediately. He crossed the room with his son in his arms and pulled me into a quick, tight hug, the kind that says more than words ever could. For a few minutes, I let myself just be his sister. I smiled for photos, held my nephew poured drinks when asked, even laughed at a few safe surface-level jokes. It almost felt normal, and that was the dangerous part. Normality in my family is always temporary. It's the calm before someone reminds you where you belong. My Aunt Diana waited for the right moment. She always does. She drifted over while Noah stepped away to talk to someone from church carrying a small plate of carrot cake like it was a peace offering. "Noah really wanted you here," she said gently, her voice dripping with that same syrupy kindness she'd used in the pew. "It's nice you came through for him, even if, well, some of us were surprised. Surprised. As if my attendance were an inconvenience, a disruption to their carefully curated image of family unity. I kept my face neutral, took the plate, and met her eyes. Surprised I remembered, I said lightly. Or surprised I showed up at all. She laughed, waving a hand as if I were teasing. "Oh, Clara, you know what I mean. You've been so busy. We weren't sure you even cared anymore." There it was, the guilt, the unspoken accusation that I was the one who drifted away, that my absence from group chats and last-minute invitations was some kind of personal failure. Never mind the years of side comments, the way conversations went quiet when I joined them, or how I was always seated at the far end of the table like an afterthought. No, it was easier to paint me as distant than to acknowledge they'd pushed me there. "You're right," I said calmly. "I have been busy." Her eyebrow lifted. "With what?" The timing almost made me laugh. She didn't know. None of them did. And that realization sent a quiet thrill through me. Not excitement, not revenge, but certainty. I smiled, just slightly. "I guess you'll find out soon." For a split second, confusion flickered across her face before she masked it with another patronizing smile and patted my arm, the way adults do with children who say something odd. "You were always so mysterious," she said, before walking away, cake untouched in my hands. I stood there heart-pounding, not from nerves, but from anticipation. Her lease was up in 34 days. As lunch went on, the subtle digs turned sharper. I overheard my uncle mutter something about outsiders when I passed the buffet table. Someone joked that I probably didn't bring a gift loud enough for me to hear. Noah noticed. He always does. I saw him start toward me, concern written all over his face, but his wife intercepted him, murmuring something I couldn't catch. Later he apologized quietly, eyes tired. "She just wants to keep the peace," he said, like that explained anything. I parked myself near the exit, coffee cooling in my hands, and waited. Part of me wanted to leave. Another part wanted to stay to see how far they'd push it to confirm what I'd spent years trying not to believe. That hope that maybe I was imagining it, maybe it wasn't that bad, died about 20 minutes later. "It's time for the family photo," someone announced. This was tradition. Every major event ended with a staged picture of the core family, a term that somehow never included me, or when she was alive, my mother. I stayed where I was, off to the side, watching them arrange themselves. Noah stood in the center with his son. His wife smiled brightly. Then came the aunts, uncles, cousins. Olivia waved over her boyfriend, a man I'd never met, and pulled him into the frame without hesitation. They made room for him instantly. Then Diana turned to me. "Clara," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "do you mind taking the picture? You're good with phones, right?" The words hit harder than any whisper, not because they were cruel, but because they were efficient. In one sentence, she erased me, reduced me to utility. I saw Noah's face fall. I saw him open his mouth to protest, and I raised a hand, slightly stopping him. I stepped forward, took the phone, and smiled. "Of course," I said smoothly. "Wouldn't want to ruin the happy memory." I took the photo. I took a few, actually making sure everyone looked perfect. Then I handed the phone back, nodded politely, and walked straight out into the parking lot. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, hands shaking, chest tight, staring at the steering wheel until my breathing slowed. The last time I felt that small, I was 16, watching my cousins get cash gifts I was told I'd already received. That night I didn't sleep. And the next morning when Noah called, his voice hesitant, I knew something else had happened. Something worse. something that would finally shatter whatever illusion I had left that this was accidental or harmless or fixable. The next morning, Noah called early before I'd even finished my coffee. I could hear it in his voice immediately, careful, hesitant, like someone walking across thin ice and hoping it wouldn't crack beneath them. He thanked me again for coming to the baptism, told me how much it meant to him, and for a moment I almost let myself believe that was all there was to say. Then there was a pause, the kind that stretches just long enough to make your chest tighten. "I heard you left early," he said. I exhaled slowly. I felt like I was in the way. "No," he said too quickly. "No, you weren't. Look, I'm sorry about the photo thing. That wasn't okay." Something loosened in my chest at that not relief exactly, but validation. At least one person had seen it. At least one person hadn't pretended it was nothing. "It's not your fault," I said, and I meant it. But Noah sighed. The sound heavy with something he hadn't planned to admit. My wife and I argued about it after he said quietly, "She thinks you're too distant, that when you're around things feel tense, like everyone has to walk on eggshells." I sat up straighter, my jaw tightening. She said that I asked even though I already knew the answer. She said people might include you more if you made more of an effort, he continued, rushing now like he was trying to soften the blow by getting it over with. I told her she didn't understand what you've dealt with, that she hasn't seen the way they've treated you over the years. I didn't respond right away. If I opened my mouth, I knew I'd say something sharp enough to leave scars, and Noah didn't deserve that. "I've spent 10 years making an effort," I said finally, my voice steady but cold. "I show up when I'm invited. I smile. I don't argue. I don't call anyone out. And somehow it's still my fault that I don't belong." "I know," he said softly. "That's why we fought." Then came the part that broke whatever was left inside me that still hoped this could be fixed. Noah hesitated again before speaking. "After you left, Diana told my wife she doesn't think you should be invited to family events anymore." I closed my eyes. "She said you make everything about yourself," he continued, his voice low, embarrassed. "That you act like you're better than everyone else. That you undermine family unity." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "They don't even know why I said. They don't even know what they're accusing me of." She mentioned she heard a rumor Noah added. Something about you owning properties. She said it was suspicious how secretive you are. There it was. Not proof, not facts, just resentment dressed up as concern. They could forgive poverty, they could tolerate struggle, but quiet success, that scared them. That made me a threat. "There's a family barbecue next month," Noah said carefully. "She told my wife not to tell you." That was the moment. Not the whisper in church, not the photo, not even the insults. This was different. This was deliberate. Planned exclusion. Erasure. I thanked Noah, told him I needed some time, and ended the call before he could apologize again. I went straight to my office, closed the door, and pulled out copies of the 3 letters I'd sent weeks earlier. Diana had 60 days. My uncle 45. Olivia 30. They didn't know it yet, but their countdown had already begun. I sat there staring at the wall, feeling strangely calm. Not angry, not vengeful, just finished. Rock bottom isn't always loud. Sometimes it's sitting alone on your couch 2 weeks later, eating cold takeout at midnight, watching your phone light up with notifications that aren't meant for you. No calls, no messages, just the dull realization that the people who were supposed to be home never wanted you there in the first place. I stopped reaching out. Not out of spite, but because I needed silence. I needed to hear my own thoughts without constantly translating myself for people who never listened. Days were manageable work meetings, routines, but nights were brutal. That's when the doubts crept in. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was cold. Maybe I made people uncomfortable. Maybe I was the problem. So I started writing things down. Not journaling exactly, more like testimony. I listed every slight I could remember, every moment I'd felt small. Then I listed every success, every bill I'd paid quietly, every property I'd saved, every time I'd shown up anyway. And slowly a pattern emerged that I couldn't ignore anymore. They didn't hate me because I failed. They hated me because I stopped needing them. The lowest point came one afternoon when I was inspecting one of my buildings, the one Olivia rented. As I passed her door, I heard laughter inside. Then my name. I paused, heart pounding, and listened as she mocked me, calling me smug, saying I didn't belong no matter how successful I thought I was. I didn't confront her. I left, quietly drove home in the rain with the windows down, and sat in the dark for hours. That night, I thought about my mother, about how she used to say that some people resent light because they've learned to live in the dark. For the first time, I understood exactly what she meant. And the next morning, I woke up knowing one thing for certain. I was done being invisible. The decision didn't come with fireworks or a dramatic speech to myself in the mirror. It came quietly the way most permanent changes do. I woke up that morning and realized I was exhausted from hiding, not from my family, but from myself. For years, I'd convinced myself that staying small was safer, that modesty was protection, that if I didn't stand out, I couldn't be targeted. But the truth was harsher than that. Staying invisible hadn't protected me at all. It had only made it easier for them to pretend I wasn't there. So I started changing things not out of spite, not even for revenge, but because I needed to see myself clearly again. The first thing I changed was my office. I'd been working out of a cramped space in a tired strip mall for years, not because I couldn't afford better, but because it matched the version of myself I thought I was supposed to be: quiet, unassuming, easy to overlook. Within a week, I signed a lease for a third-floor suite downtown, all glass and natural light, the kind of place I used to walk past and assume belonged to someone else. Moving in felt surreal. The echo of my footsteps in the empty space reminded me how long I'd been shrinking. I hired a receptionist, then an assistant. I brought on a property manager so I could stop micromanaging every detail out of fear that expansion would somehow expose me. I rebranded the company, cleaned up the website, updated the systems I'd been patching together for years. None of it was flashy, but all of it was deliberate. I wasn't pretending anymore. I was owning what I'd built. At home, the changes followed. I stopped skipping meals because I was too busy. I hired a trainer and committed to showing up 3 mornings a week, even when my body protested. I started going to bed before midnight. I shaved the beard I'd been hiding behind, not because I wanted to look impressive, but because I wanted to recognize myself when I looked in the mirror. With every small adjustment, something inside me steadied. Through all of this, my boyfriend Ethan was there in a way that never demanded attention, but never wavered either. He didn't push me to talk before I was ready, didn't try to fix anything with platitudes. He listened when I needed to vent, sat beside me in silence, when words felt useless, and reminded me gently that none of this made me cruel. "You're not changing who you are," he said one night, as we sat on the couch, takeout containers between us. "You're just stopping yourself from disappearing." That landed harder than anything my family had ever said. As I rebuilt, people outside my family started noticing. Clients referred friends. Old contacts reached out. A local business magazine ran a short feature on emerging property developers, and my name was included. Just a paragraph. Just enough. I framed it and hung it in the new office, not as a trophy, but as proof to myself that my work mattered beyond the echo chamber of people who resented it. Noah called occasionally during that time. I always answered. I never initiated. I needed him to know I still loved him, but I also needed him to see what it looked like when I stopped chasing people who only met me halfway. He never pressured me, never asked me to smooth things over. I think part of him understood that something fundamental had shifted. About a month after the baptism, I got a voicemail from him that made me pause mid-step in the hallway outside my office. "Diana got a letter," he said carefully. "She's freaking out, thinks it's a mistake, says someone's trying to evict her." I didn't call him back right away. Instead, I went for a walk. The sky was clear, the air warm, the kind of day that feels wasted if you rush through it. I bought lemonade from a kid on the corner, sat on a park bench, and thought about the girl I used to be. The one who said thank you even when it hurt. The one who waited for approval that never came. That girl deserved better. When I finally called Noah back, I didn't soften it. I sent the letters I said. He was quiet. "I thought so," he replied. "They don't know it's you yet." "They will," I said calmly. "Why now?" he asked. I took a breath. "Because I'm tired," I told him. Tired of waiting for them to change. Tired of pretending I don't have the power to stop being treated like this. Another pause, and then quietly I get it. That was enough. That night I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop arguing with reality. They had made their choices. Now I was making mine, and the clock they didn't know existed was already ticking. The first thing I noticed once the letters landed was how quickly confidence turned into panic. It was almost impressive, really. How fast entitlement collapses when it's forced to face reality. For weeks, my family had spoken about landlords the way people always do, when they think power lives somewhere else, faceless, distant, inconvenient, but ultimately bendable. They believed rules were suggestions and consequences were things that happened to other people. The letters shattered that illusion. My uncle was the first to call. I recognized the number immediately. He'd never called me directly before unless he needed something, and even then, it was usually through Noah. I stared at the screen for a full 3 rings before answering, already knowing the tone I'd hear on the other end. "This is Richard Thompson," he said without greeting. "I got a notice saying I have to vacate by the end of the month. I've lived here for years. This has to be a mistake." "It isn't," I replied calmly. A pause. "Who is this?" "Clara Rivers." Silence stretched between us, thick and disbelieving. I could almost hear the mental recalculation happening, the way he tried to fit my name into a narrative that had never included authority. "You're telling me you own the company?" he finally asked. "Yes." His laugh was sharp, defensive. "This is about the family, isn't it? Because we didn't invite you to that 4th of July thing?" "I didn't know there was a 4th of July thing," I said evenly. He hung up without another word. No apology, no accountability, just outrage that the ground beneath him had shifted without his permission. Olivia's reaction didn't come directly to me. It came through Noah, who called later that evening, sounding drained. "She's spiraling," he said, crying, saying she's going to be homeless. "She thinks the landlord tricked her." "She hasn't figured it out yet," I said. "No," he confirmed, "but she will." Diana didn't call. She showed up. It was a Friday afternoon, the office quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. The receptionist buzzed my phone. "There's a woman here asking for you. Says her name is Diana. No appointment." My heart jumped, but not with fear. "Send her up," I said. She walked into my office like a woman bracing for impact, eyes red-rimmed, shoulders stiff. She didn't sit. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "I got your letter," she said. "Good." Her jaw tightened. "You're evicting me." "I am." Why, she demanded, as if the answer hadn't been whispered into my ear weeks earlier in a church pew. I leaned back in my chair, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Because you made it clear nobody wanted me around," I said. "And I finally believed you." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she looked uncertain. "That was a joke," she said weakly. "No," I replied. "It was a line in the sand." She tried a different tactic then. Her voice softened. She talked about fixed incomes, about how hard it was to move about family. She asked if there was anything she could say to make me reconsider. I listened without interrupting, without reacting. When she finished, I shook my head once. "No." She stood there for a long moment, waiting for something. Anger, hesitation, mercy. When none came, she nodded, turned and walked out without another word. The door closed quietly behind her, and I knew it wasn't over yet. But I also knew the balance had fully shifted. That night I drafted 3 final notices, formal, unambiguous. I updated the public records for my company, making sure my name would appear exactly where it needed to when the time came. I didn't rush. I didn't second-guess myself. I'd spent years reacting to my family's behavior. Now I was planning. And they were finally starting to understand that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. The eviction dates crept closer with the kind of inevitability that makes people desperate. Once the shock wore off, my family moved into the phase where outrage turns into strategy, where they start testing boundaries to see which ones might bend if pushed hard enough. They didn't come to me directly again, at least not at first. Instead, they tried pressure, side channels, sympathy campaigns, anything that didn't require looking me in the eye and acknowledging that the power dynamic had changed. Uncle Richard left 2 voicemails in one afternoon, both angrier than the last. In the first, he accused the company of harassment. In the second, he accused me of betrayal. I didn't return either call. Olivia posted vague messages online about corrupt landlords and heartless corporations fishing for validation without ever naming names. The response was lukewarm at best. A few sad-face reactions, a couple of comments telling her to hang in there, no pitchforks, no army rallying to her defense. Diana tried once more indirectly. She called Noah. He told me about it over coffee one morning, his voice heavy with conflict. "She asked if you'd reconsider if she apologized," he said. "She said families shouldn't handle things this way." I stirred my drink slowly, watching the milk swirl. "Did she apologize?" He shook his head. "Not really. She said you misunderstood her." That told me everything I needed to know. Accountability was still off the table. What she wanted wasn't reconciliation, it was relief. The first door closed on a rainy Tuesday morning. Olivia's unit was empty when I arrived freshly cleaned, the smell of paint still lingering in the air. My contractor handed me the keys and confirmed she'd left over the weekend without a word. No damage, no confrontation, just quiet retreat. I walked through the apartment, slowly noticing the small remnants of her life, a forgotten mug, a single earring on the bathroom counter. I didn't feel triumph, I felt closure. Uncle Richard's deadline came next. I arrived just before noon, paperwork in hand. He pulled into the driveway minutes later, moving slower than I'd ever seen him. He didn't argue, he didn't shout. He packed 2 suitcases and left without asking for help. When he muttered that he'd tell my mother about what I'd done, I reminded him calmly that she already knew. He didn't respond. His truck disappeared down the street, taking decades of unspoken resentment with it. Diana surprised me by leaving early. 2 days before her deadline, she vacated the house and left the keys under the mat along with a typed note that said, "Only you win." I shredded it without a second thought. This had never been about winning. It had been about boundaries. 3 doors, 3 endings. No shouting matches, no public scenes, just the quiet finality of consequences unfolding exactly as planned. I changed the lock's scheduled renovations and filed the final paperwork. Business as usual, except this time the business was personal. A few days later, I made the last move. I updated every public filing, rebranded the company, and attached my name to it without hesitation. No hiding, no initials, no buffers. When anyone looked up the landlord now, they would see exactly who I was. And just like that, the silence returned. But this time it wasn't suffocating. It was clean. I waited 3 days, after the last door closed, before I made anything public. Not because I was nervous, and not because I was hoping someone would come running with an apology. I waited because timing matters. Power isn't just about what you do. It's about when you let people see it. For years, my family had controlled the narrative simply by speaking louder than I did. This time, I let the silence do the work first. On the 4th morning, I updated everything. I filed the paperwork that removed every layer of anonymity I'd once used as protection. The LLC that had quietly housed my investments now carried my full name clean and unmistakable. I approved the new branding, uploaded the photo I'd chosen deliberately professional, calm, unmistakably confident, and finalized the language on the website. Nothing flashy, nothing aggressive, just the truth presented without apology. Anyone curious enough to look would understand immediately that there was no faceless corporation involved here, no shadowy landlord hiding behind legal structures. It was me. It had always been me. The reaction was almost immediate. Noah texted me first, a screenshot attached. It was a Facebook post from Diana, predictably dramatic, accusing certain people of cruelty and betrayal, hinting heavily at blood ties without naming names. It had 3 likes and 1 comment from a distant acquaintance who wrote, "Yikes." I stared at the screen longer than necessary, not because it hurt, but because it felt strangely small. This was the woman who once made an entire room feel uncomfortable with a single smile, reduced now to vague accusations that barely landed. Uncle Richard tried a different approach. He started a fundraiser framing himself as a victim of injustice, spinning a story that danced carefully around the truth without ever confronting it directly. The campaign stalled almost immediately. People are far less generous when the story doesn't quite add up, and entitlement has a way of leaking through even the most polished sob stories. Olivia, according to Noah, had moved back in with her boyfriend's parents. She'd applied for a new apartment across town and listed her previous landlord, me, as a reference. I declined to comment. Not out of spite, but because silence was still the most honest response I had. There were no confrontations, no late-night phone calls, no dramatic family meeting where everything spilled out at once. Instead, there was distance. Invitations stopped. Group chats went quiet. Photos were posted without me tagged, without me cropped out, without any acknowledgement that I had ever been part of the frame to begin with. They erased me the same way they always had, only this time it didn't hurt. Because this time it was my choice too. One evening, Noah came by my condo with takeout. We sat on the balcony overlooking the city, the lights below us steady and indifferent. He ate quietly for a while before speaking. "I think they hate you more now," he said carefully, "because you made it look easy." "It wasn't," I replied. "I know," he said, and after a pause added, "I'm glad you did it anyway." That was the closest thing to a blessing I needed. As weeks passed, business moved forward without disruption. The vacated properties were renovated and filled quickly. New tenants signed leases without drama, grateful for transparency and stability. My name started circulating in professional circles for the right reasons, untangled from family noise attached only to the work I'd done. One afternoon, months later, I saw Diana sitting alone at a cafe window downtown. She looked smaller somehow, not defeated, just ordinary. She glanced up, our eyes met briefly, and then she looked away. No wave, no scowl, no last attempt at control, and that was enough. Because the truth was, I didn't need an apology. I didn't need acknowledgement. I had already reclaimed what mattered. They could keep their whispers, their selective memories, their carefully curated version of family. I had my life, my work, and my peace. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. They hadn't lost me when I stopped showing up. They lost me when they taught me how little my absence mattered to them. The strangest part of everything that came after was how ordinary it felt. I had spent years bracing for some kind of emotional collapse once the final thread snapped, imagining guilt would creep in late at night, or that I'd wake up one morning drowning in regret. Instead, what settled over me was something quieter and far more unfamiliar. Peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on everyone behaving, but the steady kind that comes from no longer needing permission to exist. The family silence became permanent. Birthdays passed without messages. Holidays came and went without last-minute invitations framed as favors. At first, I noticed the gaps out of habit, the way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue long after it stops hurting. Then slowly, even that faded. I stopped wondering what they were saying about me behind closed doors because I finally understood something that would have saved me years. If I'd learned it sooner, people who are committed to misunderstanding you will never hear the truth, no matter how carefully you explain it. My life filled in the space they left behind almost immediately. Work flourished, not just financially, but emotionally. I took pride in doing things well, in creating stable housing, in mentoring younger women, trying to break into an industry that still underestimated them. I hosted small workshops, nothing glamorous, just honest conversations about building something from nothing. Each time I told my story in pieces, stripped of family names and old wounds, I felt another layer of shame fall away. This was my narrative now, not theirs. Ethan stayed steady through it all, never once asking me to justify my choices. When I worried out loud about being too harsh, he looked at me and said, "You didn't punish them. You stopped protecting them from consequences. The difference mattered. It still does." Noah and I settled into something stronger than before, quieter, but more honest. We didn't pretend everything was fine. We didn't pretend the family fracture hadn't hurt him too. But we respected each other's boundaries, and that respect became the foundation of a relationship that didn't require sacrifice to survive. Watching him build his own family with intention and care reminded me that blood doesn't determine who deserves access to you. Behavior does. Months later, I came across an old photo while reorganizing a drawer. It was from years ago, one of those group pictures where I stood at the edge, half cropped out, smiling too politely for someone who already knew she didn't belong. I studied it for a long time before finally throwing it away. Not because it hurt, but because it no longer represented me. I didn't rebuild my life to prove a point. I didn't evict anyone to feel powerful. I didn't step into the light to be seen by people who had already decided to look away. I did it because I was tired of shrinking, tired of explaining, tired of carrying the emotional weight of other people's comfort. And here's the truth. I wish someone had told me when I was younger, being excluded by people who benefit from your silence is not a loss, it's a release. They still tell their version of the story, I'm sure. The one where I changed, where I became cold, where money made me cruel. They need that version to survive the reality that I simply stopped accepting less than I deserved. That's their inheritance, the echo of choices they never questioned. As for me, I don't knock anymore. Not on doors that were never opened for me in the first place. I build. I choose. I move forward. And for the first time in my life, that's more than enough.